My ex left me for my slender best friend because I was too fat. On their wedding day, his mom called me and said, "You do not want to miss this." The phone rang at 10:17 a.m. on the morning of my ex-boyfriend's wedding to the woman he'd left me for, and I almost didn't answer it. I was in my kitchen, barefoot, still in the oversized Vanderbilt law sweatshirt I'd slept in, waiting on a DoorDash order of breakfast tacos and fully committed to doing absolutely nothing all day. Phone face down, TV on, plan ironclad. Get through this date the same way I'd gotten through the last 6 months, by grinding forward and not looking back. The name on the screen was a contact I hadn't spoken to since I packed my things from Seir's apartment. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. When I answered, I knew the voice immediately. Crisp, certain, the kind of woman who'd worn pearls to a Saturday morning soccer game. "Nora," said Dorothea Whitlock, "you need to come to Lakeview Country Club right now. Don't change. Don't think about it. Just come." She paused just long enough to make sure I was still there. "You do not want to miss this." I should have hung up. I should have set the phone face down again, gone back to my tacos, and let whatever was happening on the other end of that call happen without me. Instead, I stood there in my bare feet, on my kitchen tile, and felt something shift underneath me, the way a fault line must feel right before it moves. I grabbed my keys. You need to understand who Seir Whitlock was before I tell you who he became. When I met him, I was 27 and working 60-hour weeks as a junior compliance analyst at Mercer Financial Group. Seir was a corporate real estate attorney at the kind of firm where people still wore ties even on casual Fridays. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He'd ordered the wrong wine. I'd corrected him without thinking, and he'd laughed instead of bristling. I remember that specifically, the laugh. I remember thinking, this one is safe. He was tall and quietly funny in the way that only people who don't need to perform humor usually are. His mother was old money Nashville, his father a retired federal judge. He drove a clean 2019 Land Rover and owned exactly 2 sets of expensive sheets and had opinions about Italian cinema that I found annoying in the best possible way. We dated for 3 years. I loved him, genuinely. In the kind of way where you start to build your life around someone without consciously choosing to, where their rhythms become your rhythms, their opinions start to filter into yours, and somewhere along the way you stop taking up your full amount of space because it's just easier, because the relationship has an unspoken gravity that always tilts slightly toward them. I didn't see it happening. That's the part that embarrassed me most later. Marin Calloway had been my best friend since we were both freshmen at Belmont. 12 years, all told. She was the maid of honor at my sister's wedding, the person I called the night my father's diagnosis came back wrong, the woman who'd sat on my bathroom floor with me once at 2 a.m. when I couldn't stop crying, for a reason I couldn't even name. She was 5'4" and 118 pounds, and looked like she'd materialized specifically to be photographed. She worked in brand development at a creative agency and had a laugh that made every room want to be in on the joke. She and Seir got along. I was glad they got along. I was glad my boyfriend liked my best friend. I was, in hindsight, the most catastrophically naive person in the whole city of Nashville. The first time I felt it, that low metallic pull in the stomach that's your nervous system trying to flag something your brain isn't ready to accept, was about 8 months before everything came apart. Marin and I had been texting all week about a birthday dinner for another friend, Jade, group chat logistics, the usual tedium. She'd been a little short with me, a little distracted. I assumed work stress. I assumed I was reading into things. I assumed a lot, apparently, because I was busy. Work had me traveling to Atlanta and back twice in 3 weeks. Seir had a case that was eating his life, and whatever Marin was doing felt like background noise against the louder frequencies of my own schedule. Then, the weekend of Jade's birthday, Marin canceled, last minute. Migraine. Seir, who had planned to come late, never showed at all. Later that night, I texted him. "Where'd you end up?" He said he'd gone home early, had a deposition Monday morning, needed the sleep. I told him Marin had bailed too. He said something like, "That's too bad," and I remember thinking it was a slightly odd response, and then immediately not thinking about it, I told myself it was nothing. This was the first loop. The fourth loop was a smell. I know how that sounds, but bear with me. I came home on a Thursday evening to find Seir's apartment, where I essentially lived 3 or 4 nights a week by that point, smelling faintly of something I recognized and couldn't place for about 2 seconds. Then I placed it. Marin's perfume, something light and specific she'd worn for years, a French thing in a dark bottle she'd bought on a trip to Montreal. I stood in his living room and breathed through my nose and thought she was here, and then I thought they must have had lunch. Or she stopped by to drop something off. They have mutual friends now, it's normal. I thought about asking him. I decided not to. I didn't want to be that person. Suspicious, searching, manufacturing problems from thin air. That's what I told myself. In truth, I think I didn't ask because some part of me already knew that asking would force one of 2 outcomes. He'd lie or he wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't ready for what came next. His body language when I got into bed that night was the quiet version of wrong. Not cold exactly, just concluded. Like a door that's technically open but hasn't moved in years. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I told myself it was nothing. This was the 4th loop. The 5th was the most calculated. About 6 weeks before I came home to find them together, Seir and I had a fight. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet, circling argument about the future, about timelines, about when we were going to stop existing in this in-between space of cohabitation adjacent without actually committing to it. I'd brought it up before. He always responded with the same reasonable, slightly distant patience. I'm not going anywhere, Nora. I just don't want to rush things. This time was different. This time he said, I think we have some fundamental incompatibilities we should probably look at. I remember the way the word incompatibilities landed. Corporate, clinical, the language of a memo, not a relationship. I asked him what he meant. He said, I just think there are things about where we are that I've been honest with myself about that we haven't been honest about together. I asked him to be specific. He wouldn't. He said he needed to think. He said maybe we should both think. I went home that night and I sat at my kitchen table at 11 p.m. and drafted a series of mental arguments for why this was just a rough patch, why 3 years was worth the discomfort of a hard conversation, why the right move was patience and communication and not panic. I texted Maren the next morning. Seir and I had a weird fight. I'm kind of scared. She texted back within 4 minutes. Oh no, tell me everything. We talked for an hour. She said all the right things. She said he was probably just stressed. She said men sometimes needed a minute to catch up to what they actually wanted. She said I should give it a few days and see how it landed. She knew exactly what he was planning. She helped me through it anyway. I didn't find out for another 6 weeks. I told myself it was nothing. This was the 5th loop. And then came the Tuesday in March. The 2nd happened 6 weeks later. I'd been working from home on a Thursday and decided to drop a coffee off at Maren's office on my lunch break. A small, unannounced thing. The kind of thing you do with a friend you've known for 12 years. Her assistant told me she was at an off-site lunch with a client and wouldn't be back until 3. I texted Maren a picture of the coffee on her desk with a note I'd written on a post-it. She replied 4 hours later, "You're so sweet. I'm sorry I missed you." Normal. Except that when I mentioned it to Seir that evening, he paused for half a second too long before saying, "Oh, that's a shame." Not, "What were you doing downtown?" Not, "When did you and Maren last actually hang out?" Just, "Oh, that's a shame." Half a second. I cataloged it and kept moving. I told myself it was nothing. This was the 2nd loop. The 3rd loop was quieter. It was a feeling. There's a version of intimacy in long relationships where you know the other person's silences as well as their words, where you can read the specific quality of how they're absent without knowing what the absence means. Seir had started going quiet in a new way. Not tired quiet, not work-stressed quiet, a different quality, closed, like a man who's decided something and is waiting to tell you. I felt it for weeks before I understood it. I thought I was imagining things. I thought I was being anxious, clingy, that old familiar fear of taking up too much space, asking too much, needing too much. I told myself it was nothing. Then I came home on a Tuesday in March. I'd had a late client call that ran long and I'd taken the highway instead of the back roads, and I made it to Seir's apartment at 7:14 p.m. instead of closer to 8, the way I'd estimated when I'd texted him that afternoon. My key still worked. I came in and set my work bag by the door and heard the television in the bedroom. I remember the light in the hallway was gold and warm, and there was music underneath the TV, something with a beat, and I thought, good, he's actually relaxing for once. I pushed open the bedroom door, the gray comforter, my yellow throw pillow, the one I'd left there months ago, tucked behind someone's head, the two of them tangled together like they'd been there for hours, laughing at something on the screen. Maren saw me first. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just went very still. And then, slowly, Seir turned his head. I remember the exact quality of the silence, the way the TV kept playing, the way my brain tried to rearrange what I was looking at, ran the calculation, failed, ran it again. I felt the air in my chest turn solid. I said very clearly, "Okay." I turned around. I picked up my work bag. I walked out. He called 17 times before midnight. I answered on the 18th. His explanation was organized. That was the part that undid me the most, how organized it was. Like he'd been rehearsing. It had been going on for 3 months. He should have told me sooner. He'd been trying to find the right time. He cared about me deeply, deeply. I've never heard that word the same way since. He said he'd realized, calmly like he was identifying a technical error, that Maren was more his type, that I hadn't been taking care of myself lately, that we didn't match. That word, match. He said it like it was neutral, architectural, like he was describing the incompatibility of 2 design systems and not the 2 humans who had shared a life for 3 years. I don't remember what I said after that. I remember hanging up. I remember sitting in my car in my own parking garage for a very long time. I remember at some point driving home and standing in my kitchen and not being able to find a single reason to move. Maren texted me that night, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Not, "I'm sorry I did this." Just, "I'm sorry you had to find out." Neither of them apologized. They just got engaged. I got a trash bag for his things and a front row seat to their Instagram highlight reel. Within weeks, couple photos. Within 3 months, a ring. People kept sending me screenshots. I muted half my contacts. And then one night, I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and let everything collapse inward. Every shape I'd made myself smaller to fit. Every silence I'd kept to keep the peace. Every time I'd softened an opinion or swallowed a feeling because I was afraid of being too much. I sat there for a long time. Then I got up. I hit the gym the next morning at 5:47 a.m. Not for him. Not to become something he'd regret losing. I want to be very precise about this, because the story is different if you get the motivation wrong. I went because I'd spent 3 years slowly disappearing inside a relationship that required me to be less, and I was done with less. I went because something in me needed to remember what I was made of. I went because grief, I was learning, had a texture. It was heavy and shapeless, and it lived in the body as much as the mind. And I wanted to meet it somewhere I could fight back. back. The first day, I lasted 8 minutes on the treadmill before my lungs started burning and my vision went soft at the edges. I walked into the bathroom, went into the third stall from the left, and cried until it passed. Then I washed my hands, dried my face, and walked back out. The second day, I went back anyway. That's all there is to say about the next 6 months, really. Early alarms. A trainer named Gil Santos, 15 years in strength and conditioning, certified sports nutritionist, former collegiate track athlete who'd blown out his knee at 23 and spent a decade rebuilding himself back to competitive shape, who looked at my intake form on the first session and said without ceremony, "We're going to build you back up from the actual foundation." He didn't ask about my ex. He didn't ask why I was there at 5:47 a.m. 3 times a week with dark circles under my eyes and the specific closed expression of someone in the middle of something. He just designed a program and worked it. The first 6 weeks were humbling. There is no other word. My body resisted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just physical soreness, but a kind of deep fatigue that sat in the bones, the kind that sleep doesn't fully fix. I'd come home, eat whatever Gil had suggested, and be asleep by 9. I canceled plans. I went quiet on social media. People who hadn't checked on me in months suddenly started texting, which I recognized as the particular cruelty of the internet age. No one shows up when things fall apart, but they all notice when you stop performing your life online. I kept going anyway. By month 2, I was running 2 miles without stopping. By month 3, Gil introduced me to a colleague, Dr. Asha Kapoor, a registered dietitian who specialized in metabolic health and worked out of a practice on Charlotte Avenue, who overhauled what I was eating in ways that had nothing to do with restriction and everything to do with fuel. No counting calories towards some punitive number. Just learning, actually learning, what my body needed to run the way I was asking it to run. That distinction mattered more than I can explain. By month 4, I was sleeping 8 hours and waking up before my alarm. By month 5, I ran into someone from my office in the parking lot of the gym, and she looked at me for a full 3 seconds before she recognized me. I also started seeing a therapist during this time. Her name was Dr. Louise Ferrand, licensed clinical psychologist, 12 years in private practice, a specialty in attachment and relationship patterns. She had the particular gift of asking questions that sounded simple until you tried to answer them. The one I kept returning to was, when did you start deciding your needs were negotiable? I thought about that question for about 3 sessions before I answered it. The answer, it turned out, predated Seir by a long time. He had just been the most recent landlord of a space I'd been renting out at below market rates for years. Understanding that didn't fix everything, but it changed the angle of things. Meal prep on Sundays, protein counts, weekly sessions with Dr. Ferran, the discovery that sore muscles and grief feel remarkably similar from the inside, and that your body doesn't care which one it is. It just adapts, provided you show up. Grief apparently can be lifted, set down, lifted again. I didn't become a different person in 6 months. I became a more complete version of the one I'd always been. The last time I weighed myself, not obsessively, just to track what was happening, I'd lost 22 pounds. What the scale couldn't measure was everything else that had changed. My posture, the way I walked into rooms, the sound of my own voice when I answered questions without softening them first. I'd stopped making myself smaller. I was done with that. Now let me tell you about the wedding. Seir and Marin had booked Lakeview Country Club, the kind of venue where everything is cream-colored and manicured and money announces itself through understatement. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. There were 140 guests. Mrs. Whitlock had, according to a mutual acquaintance, spent somewhere in the region of $47,000 on the event. My plan for that day was ironclad. DoorDash, trash TV, phone on silent. Get through it the way I'd gotten through everything else, by moving forward and not picking at things that had already scarred over. At 10:17 a.m., the unknown number called. At 10:23, I was in my car. I pulled into the Lakeview Country Club lot at 10:49. The parking lot looked like a staging area for a disaster film. Guests in formal wear clustered on the manicured lawn in small, tight groups, whispering behind programs. A woman in a champagne-colored gown was crying into her phone by the fountain. 2 men in matching ties paced at the top of the front steps. Inside was worse. A folding chair had been overturned near the entrance to the main hall. One of the floral centerpieces, an enormous white and ivory thing that must have cost $400, had been knocked from its stand and was scattered across the floor, petals and water soaking into the cream carpet. A champagne flute had shattered near the window seat and nobody had cleaned it up yet. The event coordinator, a woman named Priya Shastri, who had a sterling reputation in Nashville wedding circles and had done the Callaway Henderson wedding in 2022, was standing near the bar with her tablet clutched to her chest and the expression of someone actively reconsidering their career. Mrs. Whitlock found me near the door. Dorothea Whitlock was 62 years old, the daughter of a state senator and the widow of a federal judge, and she had the posture of a woman who had never once let a room see her rattled. She was rattled now. The pearls were there. The lipstick was there. Everything else was fracturing at the edges. She grabbed both my hands. Marin's been seeing someone else, she said, for months. There are screenshots. She barely paused. A groomsman's girlfriend found them this morning. She'd been messaging someone named Declan Walsh. He's a club promoter, apparently. Just terrible. Texts going back at least 6 months. She told him Seir was boring. She said she'd enjoy the ring and the wedding and see how long she could ride it out before she needed an exit strategy. Her voice dropped to something between a whisper and a hiss. She called my son a placeholder. I kept my face very very still. Seir found out during the bridal party photos. He confronted her in the garden. She called him a child, said she'd never actually wanted to be tied down, and left, still in the dress. She released a short, disbelieving breath. A $6,400 dress. There was a moment of silence. So here we are, she said, and her eyes moved over me, slowly, specifically, the way they had 3 years ago when Seir first brought me home, head to toe, the same calculation, except this time, the math came out differently. Nora, look at you. I waited. You've always loved him, she said. You were loyal, you were steady, and now look, you're beautiful. You match him. That word, match. I felt something settle in my stomach. Not anger, not triumph, something quieter than both. We could do something small today, she said. Something simple. A civil ceremony, save face. Everyone's already here, the flowers are already paid for, Mrs. Whitlock. And the officiant is already here. He's very flexible. He's done civil ceremonies in 45 minutes. Mrs. Whitlock. She stopped. You called me here, I said very carefully, to marry your son, at his cancelled wedding, to my former best friend, 6 hours from now. Don't let your feelings. He sat me down 6 months ago, I said, and told me I didn't take care of myself, that I didn't match him. Those were his words, not mine. Her jaw tightened. He humiliated himself 6 months ago, I said. Today is just everyone else catching up. The silence between us was absolute. I looked at the broken centerpiece on the floor, at the soaked champagne flute, at the overturned chair no one had bothered to write, at 140 guests in formal wear wandering a manicured lawn with nowhere to go. I hope he's okay, I said, and I meant it. But I won't be the band-aid. I turned around and walked out. I want to tell you that I drove home with the windows down and music up, feeling like a woman in the third act of a movie. I want to tell you it was cinematic. The truth is, I drove home shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. The first time, in a Walgreens parking lot on Belmont Boulevard, I sat with my hands on the wheel and my breath coming in these shallow, rapid cycles and thought, what just happened? The second time, idling at a red light on 21st Avenue, I started laughing, the kind of laugh that's only one frequency away from crying, and didn't stop for almost 2 minutes. By the time I got home, the shaking had settled. I changed out of the jeans I'd thrown on in my rush to leave. I made tea, Earl Grey, loose leaf, the ceramic pot my mother had given me the Christmas before she moved to Portland. I sat on my couch with both feet tucked under me and let the quiet in. I had not, I realized, thought about what Seir was feeling right now. I thought about it now. The image of him, that controlled, quietly certain man, confronting Marin in a garden while 140 people waited inside. The expression on his face when she walked away. The ceremony he would have been preparing for. All the words he would have memorized. The particular effort of trying to be ready for the biggest moment of a life he'd been building toward. I thought about that. And then I thought about Grey Comforter, the yellow throw pillow, the way Marin hadn't flinched. I drank my tea. At 4 p.m., a text from a number I didn't recognize turned out to be one of the bridesmaids, a woman named Chelsea Prue, who I'd met exactly twice at Seir and Marin's housewarming dinner the previous spring. She'd gotten my number from Jade. Everything's been canceled. Seir's at his parents' house. His mom told people you showed up and turned her down. Some people are saying you came to gloat. I thought you should know. I set the phone face down. At 5:30, a call from Jade, which I let go to voicemail. She left 3 minutes of breathless recapping. Marin had apparently texted her from somewhere in Brentwood, unbothered, with a photo of a mimosa and the message, "Life's too short." Jade's voice did the specific thing it did when she was trying to be neutral and failing spectacularly. At 6:15, a call from my sister in Atlanta, who had somehow already heard and wanted details immediately. I talked to her for 40 minutes. She laughed in all the right places. She also said, "Nora, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Actually okay? Or performance okay?" And I said, after a pause, "Actually okay." She believed me, because it was true. At 7:42 p.m., 3 heavy knocks at my front door. I already knew. I'd been expecting it all day, the way you expect a storm when the sky has had a particular color since morning. There was no other version of this day in which Seir Whitlock didn't eventually end up at my door. That was just the arithmetic of who he was. When things broke, he went toward the one person who had, historically, always been there. I took one long breath. I set down my mug on the coffee table. I ran a hand through my hair, which had grown out in the last 6 months, thicker and longer than I'd kept it in years. I walked to the door. I opened it. He looked like a man who'd been through something. That's the only way I know to put it. The collar of his white dress shirt was open, 2 buttons undone, the tie completely gone, left somewhere between the garden and his car, probably. His hair was out of place. His eyes were red and hollowed out in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral 4 years ago. He'd been crying, or close to it, or holding it back for so long that the effort had left its mark on his face. He had clearly rehearsed something. His mouth opened. Then he saw me. Not the way he'd been seeing me for 3 years. Not the casual, assumption-heavy glance of a person who thinks they already know what they're looking at. He saw me. The way you see something when you're forced to abandon everything you thought you knew about it. His eyes dropped to my feet, climbed slowly, stopped somewhere around my face and stayed there. I watched the rehearsed words fall apart somewhere before they reached his mouth. His jaw went slack. His eyes were doing that very specific thing, that recalibration, where you're trying to map a new image over an old one and the two keep refusing to align. The silence stretched out long enough to become its own statement. He blinked. "Nora," he said, finally. Just the name. Nothing after it. "Seir," I said. The sounds of the neighborhood moved around us. A car car 2 streets over, something from a neighbor's television, the distant percussion of a lawn sprinkler. The porch light caught the angles of his face. He looked like a man who had arranged his whole life toward one fixed point and arrived to find it gone. "I heard what you told my mother," he said at last. "Okay, she was wrong to call you." He said it like he was reading it off something. I didn't ask her to do that. I wouldn't have. I know. Another silence. "You look," he stopped. His jaw worked. "You look really different." "I know," I said. "How are you?" He stopped again. Are you? "I'm good, Seir." I said it without any particular emphasis, just the fact of it. "I'm genuinely good." He stood there, and I understood, watching him, that there were things he wanted to say. The man had never been without language in the entire time I'd known him, and that for the first time in 3 years, he had absolutely nothing that would work. No argument that applied, no framework that fit, no explanation that would function in the presence of the woman standing in front of him, who was not the woman he'd calculated on, who had taken everything he'd said about her, and quietly, privately, without spectacle, refused it. He hadn't lost Marin today. He'd realized what he'd thrown away 6 months ago. That was different. That was worse. "Good night, Seir," I said. I closed the door. I stood on the other side of it for a long moment, hand still on the knob. I listened to his footsteps move off the porch, the sound of his car door, the engine, the particular diminuendo of someone driving away. I walked back to the couch, picked up my tea, lukewarm now, but still good, pulled my feet back under me, turned the TV on. I didn't think about him for the rest of the night. 3 months later, I ran my first 5K on a Saturday morning in October. Nothing special. A local charity run, out and back along the river. 847 participants according to the results page. My time was 31:14, which wasn't impressive by any standard except that 8 months ago I'd lasted 8 minutes on a treadmill before hiding in a bathroom stall. Gil texted me after I posted the medal photo. "Look at you." I knew. My sister flew in for the weekend and made me a dinner I ate 3 plates of. Jade came over with wine and we sat on my back porch until midnight, and I told her the whole story from the beginning, properly, for the first time, and she listened and shook her head slowly at all the right moments and said, "At the end, you know what's wild? You seem like you." I told her I was starting to feel like it. I'd heard through the general osmosis of a social circle that Marin was in Chicago now, that she and Declan Walsh had lasted about 6 weeks before that also fell apart. I didn't go looking for that information, and I didn't feel much when it arrived. I heard that Seir had taken a position with a firm in DC, that his mother had spent most of September being very gracious to everyone she encountered in an apparent act of community reputation management, that the flowers from the wedding had been donated to a hospice facility in East Nashville, and that a woman who worked there had written a small piece about it for a neighborhood newsletter under the headline, "Unexpected Beauty." I cut that one out and put it on my refrigerator. Not because it was about him, because I liked the idea of something that had been arranged for one purpose, ending up somewhere completely different, being received by people who actually needed it, doing its job anyway. Things work out in strange ways. I know that now. I've thought a lot about the word match, the way he used it as a verdict, a closing argument. We don't match. Like compatibility was a fixed variable. Like I was a constant he'd already solved for and found wanting. What I know now, standing on the other side of those 6 months, is that people aren't constants. They're not static. The version of me that stood in that doorway with my work bag, looking at the gray comforter, looking at the two of them, that version was real. She was there. She was also not the full picture. She got up. She went back. She ran 3.1 miles on a Saturday morning in October, and her lungs didn't light up once. That's the thing about being underestimated. It has a very specific consequence that nobody tells you about. It frees you. The moment someone decides they know exactly what you are, they stop watching. They stop accounting for you. They make their plans without factoring in what you're capable of becoming. And then one night, they show up at your door with something rehearsed, and they see you, really see you, and everything they'd calculated comes apart at the seams. Seir stood on my porch and couldn't find a single word. That was enough. That was more than enough.